So last week I shared a song with you that I was honestly kind of shocked that very few of you knew. I was shocked, although I thought about it, I thought, no, most of you know it, you just were embarrassed to raise your hand. You wouldn't want to admit to being so uncouth as this. But the song was, "We Three Kings of Orient Are Tried to Smoke a Royal Cigar." I got corrected this week. It's not tried to smoke a royal cigar, it's tried to smoke a rubber cigar. And then I went, oh, that's right. It's been a long time. It was loaded and exploded. And then I said I got stuck because we all start laughing. We didn't remember the rest of it. That same person gave me the rest of it. It was loaded and exploded. Now we're on yonder star. And just in case it creates backlash that we would even talk of such a thing in church, I don't want to call him or her out by name, but if they just wanted to raise their hand and say, I was the one who knew, oh, well, Kim's proud. Thank you for that. Made my week. I appreciate that follow-up. But now I want to go to the real song, because the real song has the chorus we all know, and then it goes into 3 verses, each which traditionally comes from a different one of the wise men, different magi. The first one being Caspar, or Gaspard, I learned in the French version. And he sings, "Born a king on Bethlehem's plain, gold I bring to crown him again. King forever, ceasing never, over us all to reign." And it leads into my first story, which is about the Magi bringing gold. The first gift, gold. The gift that would be appropriate for a king. I mean, that's who they were coming to see. Last week we read in Matthew 2 how they arrived in Jerusalem and they went to Herod. Now note that this is not Herod, the person who has John the Baptist beheaded. This is his dad, who will only live a few more years after this. With this dad, Herod the Great, he must have been surprised when this group of wise men came from afar from the east and said, we're here to find out, because we've been following the star, where the birth occurred for the new baby who's the king of the Jews. Because Herod must have been saying, no, wait a second, I'm the king of the Jews. He was Herod, king of Judea, king of the Jewish kingdom. Now, put quotes around king. He was a vassal king. He was allowed to be called king by the real king, which was, well, Caesar. He had paid enough bribe money. He had promised to raise enough taxes that he had that position. And so here were some other people coming in saying, we're looking for the new king. And that must have been fairly intimidating. You know, these wise men brought the right gift for a king. Genesis tells us that the best land would be the land that had gold. The Ark of the Covenant, it was overlaid with gold. The palace that David lived in, it had gold everywhere, including gold armament, which I assume was just for display. And then the temple that his son would build, it had gold everywhere. Gold cherubs, gold trumpets, gold lampstands, gold doors. And here come these wise men, and they bring gold. I don't know what form it was in. It doesn't tell us. Was it sacks of gold dust? Was it large chunks of nuggets? Was it jewelry? I think most likely it was coins, because gold coins could be made anywhere, and it didn't matter what was embossed on it. It was gold, and anybody would take it and love to get it. We live in a weird time. I don't know if you've noticed this, but I'm sure you have. There are, from time to time, demonstrations, and they're called No King's Days. You know what I'm talking about? And I think we'd all would agree, yeah, we don't want a king. I told you I'm an Anglophile, and I'm happy for England to have a king. It's a great tourist attraction. Well, you know what I mean. It's fine for them, but even he really doesn't have that kind of power that a king possesses. He's a figurehead. But in America, we don't want any kings, but I would like to go to some of those demonstrations, and I would like to say to them, you know, you're wrong. There is a king. In fact, he's the King of Kings, and his name is Jesus. And that's who the Magi came to see. But I want to make a proposal for you that takes us in a little bit different direction. So they brought the King of Kings the proper gift, but was there a purpose rather than it just simply representing that this was a king, the king of the universe, the king of all? And I think maybe there was. So going back last week, I got kind of garbled up, but I was talking about the order that things happened and the dates and the times and all that. Last week in Matthew, we learned that there's the birth of Jesus. And then sometime, after that birth, these wise men show up. And these wise men end up being warned not to go back to the king, and the Holy Family, they're warned they got to get out of there. So they escape to Egypt. And then only after it's safe to come home do they return and go back to their original home base of Nazareth. That's the Matthew version. But now we started today with the lighting of the Advent candles with the Advent story out of Luke. And it's different. It does not contradict, but it tells us parts of the story that we don't know from Matthew. And trying to sync those together can be a little tricky, but here's what we learned from Luke. We learn that there's the birth, so that's shared by both stories. Then we learn that Jesus is circumcised. That takes place 8 days later, required by law of the male born. Now, it doesn't say where he was on that 8th day. But then it says in Luke that there was a required by the Jewish law, a ritual of purification that took place with this family, particularly with the mother and particularly with the baby, that takes place on the 40th day after birth. And the 40th day after birth, they did this dedication in a very privileged manner in the temple in Jerusalem. So between the birth and the 8th day and the 40th day, did they go home to Nazareth? Probably a 4-day casual walk in those days. That was very possible. They came back up. Did they stay in Bethlehem? That's in the neighborhood. That's a suburb of Jerusalem. A much shorter, easier walk. We don't know. It doesn't tell us. But what we do know about this dedication is that they were still poor, because they were allowed, according to Luke, to give an offering of 2 birds. Read with me. I'm in Luke chapter 2 and verse 21, if you have your Bibles. It says, on the 8th day, when it was time to circumcise him, he was named Jesus, and the name the angel had given him before he had been conceived. When the time of the purification according to the law of Moses had been completed, Joseph and Mary took him to Jerusalem, presented him to the Lord, as it is written in the law of the Lord. Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to the Lord and to offer a sacrifice in keeping with what is said in the law of the Lord. And then it leaves out the expensive sacrifice and goes directly to the poor person sacrifice, a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons. Pretty interesting little story, which makes me wonder if the timing of this is after the purification. They received the warning, the visit from the Magi, and gold became their means of escape. Gold provided for this family the money they needed to go to Egypt, to set up shop again, to live there and survive until they were safe, and then they had the money to come back to their town of Nazareth. That would seem to make a lot of sense to me, but by the time they get back to Nazareth, they are again just struggling, normal people. This is the story. It's the story of gold. But it's not the only story. It is a story that tells us that these wise men must have known it is better to give than to receive, and so they gave, and they must have rejoiced. They must have been blessed by that. And how much more would they have been blessed if they thought, we enabled this family to live, to survive the gift of gold. But they brought also a second gift. The second gift, it makes me think that maybe we could use our memories to think about the smells of Christmas. You know, you've heard doctors, you've heard scientists say that smell is a powerful memory trigger. It helps us to think about things that happened in the past and immediately go, oh yeah, I've smelled that before. And maybe we could just take a deep breath and remember the smells of Christmas. Do you smell Mom's turkey? Do you smell the stuffing or the dressing? I remember as a kid, Mom, please don't put those oysters in it. They had learned that when my dad was stationed in the Cape Cod, Massachusetts. I learned how to eat around that nasty oyster stuff. Can you smell the pumpkin? Can you smell, by the way, pumpkin pie? I love what Garrison Keller says. He says that the best pumpkin pie you've ever had in your life is not that much better than the worst pumpkin pie you've ever had in your life. That's been my experience, but there's also pecan. There's also all the trimmings. There's ambrosia. There's sweet potatoes, whipped potatoes. There's all sorts of smells. My parents had Christmas candles that my mom also lit. They were scented to smell like cranberry or things like that. But what if we go to the first Christmas? I wonder if it's not in our memories, if we could conjure up the smell. A barn, a cave, a little section outside of a house, but there was this manger, a food trough. Maybe there were animals. Maybe the smell was it needed to be mucked out. Maybe it was just the earthy smell of animals who were dusty and never were washed, and maybe it was the smell of hay, dry or even moldy. That first Christmas, I wonder what it smelled like. One more time. Maybe it smelled of incense. That was the second gift. That was a gift that was brought by these fellows, the Magi. They came from afar. This gift, it was as expensive pound for pound, ounce for ounce as gold. And it was made by them cutting into a tree. And the tree, well, it could be like sap, but they call it resin because it's thicker. But like sap, this resin would harden when exposed to the air. And when exposed to the air and hardened and dried enough, it could be sanded down, whittled down, ground down to like sawdust. And then with a bonding agent, it could be made into little shapes. Or like our guys here, Austin and Marshall, they're walking around with these sticks of incense. But not just of incense, of frankincense. Frankincense, you light it on fire, then you blow it out, and it begins to smoke. Frankincense, frank means the best, the purest. And so they brought of all their options only the best for this newborn king. And they had brought it from afar, so it probably took a lot of money to purchase it because it's a hard thing to make. It took a lot of money to travel so far. And they gave it to the Holy Family. Melchior, who sings that third verse in the Three Kings song, says, frankincense to offer have I, incense owns a deity nigh. Prayer and praising, all men raising, worship him, God most high. In the book of Hebrews, it tells us that Jesus was a priest. This was a gift that would be appropriate for a priest, for a holy person. But Hebrews tell us that he wasn't just a priest, he was a priest of priests. He was in the order of Melchizedek, the perfect priest. But he was even better and higher that he was the priest for all times, being the mediator between God and human beings. The one who communicates up and down, but also who represents us to God, who represents God to us, who is God himself. In fact, I've wondered, did these wise men really get it? I mean, they saw this thing in the sky, and that told them there's a new king being born. Somehow they knew it was the king of the Jews, maybe from the location. Well, that's where the Jewish people are. And then they get here and they hear some scripture about this person being born in Bethlehem, and maybe they got more of the truth there. After all the yuck happens in Herod's mind, they also get the story that you better not go back and tell him. So who knows what that dream included. But in Matthew chapter 2, it tells us that after they gave those three gifts, they worshiped him. And that word worship is the appropriate word. It is a word that literally means to prostrate yourself. That is when we lie down totally flat on the floor with our arms stretched out towards the one we are worshiping. Or maybe you're on your knees and you just bend all the way over and put your face on the ground, again with your arms stretched out for the one we're worshiping. It is the appropriate position for worshiping God. And they brought gold because it was a king, and they brought frankincense because it was God that was born in Bethlehem. And how blessed these wise men must have been to have given the gift that they gave. First, Magi, they gave gold. Second, the Magi, they gave frankincense. Well, they also gave another gift, and we'll talk about that next week, which, heads up, we'll be doing a lot next week. We're going to have a little bit of children's music. We're going to have lighting of the Advent candle. We'll have another children's sermon, and we'll also have the Lord's Supper, which will fit right into this Christmas story. But all of this made me think of something else. It made me think of a couple that modeled for me very early in my ministry what it means to be blessed by giving and not receiving. It was Ronnie and Ronnie Anderson. Yes, they were husband and wife with the same first name. Well, they spelled it differently, R-O-N-N-Y versus R-O-N-I. You can guess which is male, which is female. And they came to the church I was pastoring and told us about the ministry that they were part of. It started when Ronnie, the husband, who was a CEO at a very successful company and doing very well, joined the churchmen, about half a dozen from his home Baptist church in Atlanta, Georgia, to go to Kurdistan. Now, Kurdistan was temporarily at peace, and so they were able to do a little bit ministry. They went up into the mountains. They came to this village. The village was dominated on the edge of town by a giant abandoned Soviet prison. The gates were opened, but the only people living in it were orphans. And there were dozens and dozens, and they were struggling to survive, mainly survive by stealing and by begging in this incredibly poor village that they were right next to. He said when they got there, the only source of water was a huge gutter, basically, that ran through the center of the town. And it provided water for everything. Everything going in and everything going out. And he said that they had to take antibiotics every day while they were there. They tried to stay away from that water, of course, but you just never knew what you're going to be exposed to. But after working with these orphans for a week, he called the other Ronnie, and he said, "I'm not coming home. And I want you to sell everything we have, put the money in our bank account where we can draw from it from such a far away place away, and join me." And she did. And so they had been there for a couple of years, and then their money ran out. And they were trying to help these poor little kids. They were trying to feed them. They were trying to get other churches involved. And they lived on the edge of town, the other side from the fortress, because they were outsiders, and that's where they had to live. And they were up against a cliff, and they said every time there was anything to celebrate, all the men of the town, which was any boy 12 years or older, came with their machine guns and fired at the cliffs over their house. So he said it was a very uncomfortable feeling. But God had called them, and they had given everything, and were so blessed. They were brokenhearted when their money ran out, but CBF, the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, picked them up as missionaries and funded them to stay until war broke out again and they had to come home. At which point, I don't think they would have come home, except CBF said, "But we have a ministry for you with the Kurds right here in America." In fact, in Atlanta, there's one of the biggest home base of Kurdish immigrants that there is here in America. And so they came back, and it was at that time they came and visited with our church about what had happened in their life, where they had learned, oh man, we had a lot of stuff, we had a lot of goods, we were very comfortable, but we have never been blessed like we have been blessed to give to the Lord Jesus, of our lives, of our gifts, of what we own. Our church right now, well, we joined the whole secular world as well as the whole Christian world in America in a time of giving. If you didn't see him last week, then again, we have some brochures, seats to seats, for the Lottie Moon offering. Debbie, thank you for getting those out and keeping us thinking about giving. We just had a presentation from the Luvins. They talked about something that we support. The cooperative program supports Texas Baptist and the ministries that help churches and they go outside of churches to do things. Tonight at 4, there'll be a special called business meeting, and then hang around. There'll be a little town hall, and Jerry will talk to us about what giving to this church can do. And I hope through all of that you'll not be just like a kid or 2 or 7 that are going to come and join me here in just a minute after the invitation and maybe bring back a coin, I hope you don't do it just because there's some excitement, there's some benefit to you, but I hope you do it because you're blessed to give more than to receive. God will bless you as we make like a magi.